Pawn shop workers. What's the dumbest thing a customer has brought in? Story 1. A favorite story from when I worked at a used bookstore. Boss didn't like dealing with men's magazines, but he had a philosophy that he would pay something for anything you could haul in the door. Kept the Playboys and Penthouses, etc., in a couple open boxes a couple of feet away from the front counter, to at least discourage teenage boys from rummaging through them. It was a futile effort. The sad remnants in those boxes tended to have been pawed over several hundred times by the aficionados. But each spring there would be a small group of college boys coming in, with 2, 3, 4 or more brown paper grocery sacks, piggly wiggly, full of those art studies. They were about to go back home for the summer and were leaving their frat houses. Oh noes. Can't have smut when we get back home. I would glance it over and lowball them. I was to pay myself with cash left in the store at the end of the day or week. Plus, we sold the magazines for $1 or $2 each, depending on condition. I would offer, say, $25 for the lot. They would be furious. This had cost $400, $500, or even more. I would suggest they browse the store. I would check more closely, and with trade, could maybe offer a better deal. The group would wander down the aisles, exclaiming in delight at old guitar magazines, science fiction books, old records, etc. While they wandered, invariably 2 or 3 of our regulars would rummage through the goodies. I would sell whatever, even charging a premium for some of the more graphic mags. By the time the college boys made it back to the counter, arms laden with their newfound treasures, I would have sold off 3/4 or more of what they had carried in. Not once did they look around to see they could have had me over a barrel, so to speak. More than once, I would give them a big discount on stuff they were getting out of the store and could offer them almost double what I originally offered, for the goodies I no longer had, mind you. And they only had to pay me $20 or $30 for their $100 of newfound old guitar magazines. They left delighted. I made close to $100 for the store and a commission of $100 for myself. Some quick creative paperwork, and my boss was happy to see the extra money, and the dozen or so new men's magazines in the smut box when he would show up the next day. That is genius. This definitely had to have taken place before the internet. Yes, I know there are probably some people who still purchase the magazines, or they're probably within an area where there's not a good internet speed connection. But I don't know how much this would go over in today's money or today's access to that kind of material. But good on him for making the most of everything. Story 2. A lot of trading card games like Yu-Gi or Magic or Pokemon are valuable, but it's obviously not any and all cards that were printed X years ago. I can only speak for Magic the Gathering, but I wager other games must be similar. Card prices are not only about rarity or scarcity because they're now hard to find. It's also linked to the usefulness of the card in a competitive setting. One of the main tournament circuits of Magic is a special format where only the last few expansions of cards are playable. That means that every time a new set of cards is coming out, the oldest ones that were still available in this setting become unplayable in these tournaments, and so on and so forth, each time it happens. This means that cards that fetched a very good price because they're powerful in the current meta of this particular format of tournaments will lose a lot of value overnight when the official rotation of playable cards happens and players are forced to move on to newer cards. But there are also tournaments where basically any card from any old expansion is playable, apart from a few specific banned cards. So sometimes when a new powerful combo emerge in the meta, because it uses a newer card with an old one or something like that. Some old cards that had no real value until now will suddenly fetch a high price. So yes, a lot of cards from TCG like Magic can definitely be valuable. But A, you're obviously not going to get what they're actually worth in pawn shops or garage sales. You'll have to go to online trading websites and specialized stores that buy and sell individual cards to other players in the known. And you have to be aware that their prices can and will change a lot over time. B, the metric tons of weak common cards found 29 times in a box of 30 boosters that no one outside of children/complete beginners will actually ever use or want will only ever be worth what they weigh as fire kindling. And even then, outside of another beginner who will be happy to buy a ton of random cards at a garage sale or basic toy stores, pawn shops that will just resell them as such, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who will bother with this junk. I remember when Magic the Gathering first came out. I bought a bunch of them. I bought a bunch of expansion packs. And then I sold them all back because I couldn't figure out the game. And I remember I had some cards that are now worth a lot of money nowadays that I should have held on to. Oh well. Story 3. I think lots of trading cards are thought to be valuable just because it's been like a few years since they were released. Like sure, your random Pikachu card stopped being sold 3 years ago, but there are still like 1 million copies in circulation and whatnot. It's when that Pikachu card was a misprint from 20 years ago and the art has never been reused and only like 10 were made is when it has some value. But also most cards are only valuable to people that want them. A random little Timmy won't care if the card would go for $1,000 on eBay. They'll buy it for $1 and be on their way. You're the one that walked into a store instead of using the internet to resell it. You got to expect that the way more limited customer base may be a bit less inclined to shell out $1,000 when they walked into Goodwill with $20 they got from whatever loose bills they had in their pocket. And now I'm reminded of a garage sale family had when I was like 10 or whatever, and was sad some of the action figures were just sold for $1 or $2 for a box of them, when to me they had value, weren't in bad condition at all, and just were a lot of them. I now understand that most were being sold with whatever series still going on or having just finished and thus not rare at all. GameStop. Yeah, they just suck in general for selling that stuff anyway. Hence the memes, but trying to sell bootleg games and consoles to them, they are still a known business that has to get permission and have legality to sell the real consoles. They're not a random pawning store that's tucked in the corner of a barely standing shopping center in the middle of nowhere. Like, Goodwill is better for that, and they're also in a known establishment. But they're literally not a place that gets new stuff, and thus are a lot less likely to care about getting weird junk. This one was kind of rambling on a bit. There was a little bit of a punctuation missing here and there. But I get what he's saying. Value is in the eye of the beholder. Somebody is gonna pay $1 for something that may be worth $1,000 to some collector half the world away. But you gotta learn how to reach out to them. It's finding the audience that's gonna pay what you think they're worth, not what the person who's looking at it has on him and thinks it's worth. Story 4. I honestly don't know how pawn shops are even still in business anymore. I understand that they need to make a profit off the things they buy and will lower the price so they can still make that profit, but they also often underestimate how much people are willing to pay for what is essentially garbage. I've literally seen an empty, torn cardboard box sell on eBay for thousands of dollars, and if you sell your stuff on eBay rather than a pawn shop, you cut out the middleman and make a full profit yourself rather than only getting half of what your stuff is actually worth. Yard sales and pawn shops literally shouldn't exist anymore because they have a very tiny sales market. Almost no one even shops there anymore, so all they end up doing is ripping people off because the demand isn't there. But if everyone went to eBay and bought and sold online, You'd actually get more demand for your useless stuff, plus you can quickly compare what other similar items are selling for. There's actually a two-way problem at pawn shops where half the time the seller just wants way too much for the item they're trying to sell, and the other half the time the pawn shop just vastly underestimates the value and or demand for an item. I saw an episode of Pawn Stars where they refused to buy someone's vintage toy collection because they thought they weren't valuable and there was no demand for them. But they were all toys that sell for thousands of dollars on eBay. Story 5. Oh my deity, yes. So, I am a pawnbroker. Can you ask me questions if you have any? People who come in are nuts. Some stories. 1. Some guy brought in a red rock and claimed it was a blood diamond. He then proceeded to tell me what makes blood diamonds red. I would have given him a history lesson, but I couldn't stop laughing. He was definitely on substances, got ticked and left. 2. First week working, I had a guy call in asking if we could take fossils. We don't. But I said we did, and that we had a guy for that so he can bring it in on Tuesday. He did not come in. 3. Along the vein of the first story, some guy brought in a small goldish slab of concrete and wanted a loan against its weight value. 4. We bought a welder. It sat in the back for 30 days, legal holding period for where I live, and came out for sale. This guy comes in, and it turns out it's his welder that was stolen. We didn't buy it in bad faith, and it wasn't flagged while in possession, so we told him he would have to buy it. He got ticked, asked if we liked being junk people, and called the cops. The cops sided with us, and we sold it to him at a discount. He was super mad, but was a lot more respectful when they caught the guy. Thanks to us, because they didn't have any visual indication as to who had stolen it before they came into our pawn shop. And he asked for the needed paperwork to get his money from this guy after having to buy his own welder. I have loads more, so if you have questions or an interest, you're welcome to ask. Story 6. Worked at a used bookstore when in college, many years ago. Owner and I had some disagreements about his philosophy of giving something for pretty much anything you could haul in the door. 50-gallon trash bin filled with Harlequin romances or cheap knockoffs? Ring it up, $10. Boss, we are gaining a trash bin full of books that won't sell for 5 years. Every issue of National Geographic since 1955? Ring it up, $1 for each full year of issues. Boss? We already have at least 20 copies of every issue since 1950 and 10 copies of issues since 1920. A beer flat full of baseball cards? I refuse to deal with them. Boss would spend 3 or 4 hours pricing out 500 cards or so for 1 to 2 cents each that would be sold over the next 2 or 3 years at 5 cents each. Return on investment seemed rather paltry. After one particular argument, he fired me and I quit. But 5 minutes later, he offered me to run a second store he owned, 50 miles away, but across a state line. I accepted and ran that store how I thought it should be run. Made a couple of mistakes, but my store was clean, organized, and had rheumatoid junk pared down, so what was there was more visible and more desirable. Made 50% higher profit than his store, despite being a quarter of the size in a town a quarter as big and having 1/20th of the inventory. Maybe the whole thing was just him sizing you up. I mean, I know it's a conspiracy theory, but hear me out. Maybe this whole time he was just sizing this person up to seeing how he would handle all these situations, and then gave him this other store, maybe to see, well, let's see you do any better, or hey, I like the way you think for this market, I'm just not going to tell you and hire you for it anyway. Either way, this is a store the boss owns, and this guy is crowing about all the profit he's making, but he's making the profit for the boss, so who's really the winner here?
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 7. I have a foil Delta Species Raichu card from 2005 in a Pokemon deck. And I use this Pokemon deck to entertain some kids at my job because a lot of particularly rowdy kids will sit quietly and examine a deck of Pokemon cards for hours. especially if most of the cards in the deck were printed before they were born. I really annoyed one of my older campers because I don't have sleeves for this deck, including the foil Raichu, and I disappointed her by informing her that some previous campers had made me look up how much money my cards were worth, and the Raichu was worth $15 maximum. It's in decent condition, but it was first acquired by 6-year-old me and used against my siblings in the field of battle, so definitely not mint. The Dialga card I have that should be worth $5 is also an obvious forgery, as it's got a Pechu berry instead of an adamant orb pictured for the card item. The text on the card says adamant orb, and the move name for what would have been Roar of Time is just missing. Honestly, now that I think about it, sleeves are probably a good idea, given that I take these cards to work and let kids touch them, but I'd have to buy a bunch and a deck box that can fit the sleeves, and I can't be bothered. The real mystery is how I acquired the forged Dialga, because I've only ever bought sealed packs and decks from my local comic/game shops. Story 8. I was the paintball guy. Used to buy the entry-level stuff at yard sales for cheap and sell to a local pawnbroker. I would tune them up, mod the barrel and gas valve a little, and they always offered me no less than $20. They knew I did good work and never once refused anything I had for them. I wandered in one day with an older Sheridan blowback that I scored 2 days earlier for $3. Stood right next to a big guy. I'm a bit of a shrimp at 5'7", 160 pounds, and this guy was like 6'8", 290, trying to sell a tournament-grade CCI Phantom. One glance told me it was nothing more than a cheap plastic Kmart special with gobs of goodies taped to it, and he was demanding $100 for it. I said nothing, but walked back to my truck, grabbed my real tournament Phantom, and set it on the counter. I'll give this guy $300 for his, but only $5 for yours, is basically what transpired. Guy storms off, I get $20 for the Sheridan, use it for the purchase of a nice collapsible stock for the Phantom, and go to my tourney happily. Story 9. Once in a while, I overhear the employee on the phone with customers who argue about prices since they get a lot of those people, especially when it's resellers. I've never brought anything in, but the thing that surprised me most was 2 bottles of essential oils for $5 each, and since I love essential oils, I snatched them up. I saw someone walk in with a huge box of Post-it notes, and I think he got around 15 cents for each, and now they have the box sitting in the store. They do get things they don't know about once in a while, which almost never ends in the customer's favor, like fake violins being sold for $170, even though the fingerboard is on the wrong angle and it has plastic pieces. Other times I'll find something that has a simple issue and get a bargain for it, only to have it fixed within minutes. Next time I go, I should ask them if anyone has ever brought in anything weird. Where I'm currently living, there's actually quite a few pawn shops. Well, there's actually thrift stores and pawn shops, but I haven't found anything really surprising except once. There was a limited edition Ariana Grande headphones from Brookstone, complete with the ears, looked in good condition, and it was $40. I would have sold it to resell it if I had the money on me, but when I went back, it disappeared. Someone else saw the bargain in that. $40, it was brand new. Brand new. Story 10. I used to work at a grocery store, and Walter Whiteheads would constantly steal shampoo and laundry detergent. One day after work, I went to the pawn shop down the street. Sure enough, one of my regulars was selling the shampoo that she had stolen that very morning. Turns out that the Walter Whitehead would steal some of the nicer products, sell it to pawn shops for pennies on the dollar, and then the pawn shop would sell it for roughly 25% less of what we sold it for. The pawn shop had to have known that they were buying and reselling stolen products, but it was such a relatively low amount that the grocery store didn't do anything about it. The grocery store eventually went out of business, and shortly after, so did the pawn shop. Story 11. I was in a pawn shop once on a road trip looking around. A teen came in with what looked like a hard black ball. He claimed he had found it as a child smoldering in his backyard and believed it was part of a meteorite. I got distracted and ended up walking away. But I heard the kid arguing with 2 of the shop guys. Ultimately, the kid flew out the door and slammed the thing on the ground. When I went to examine it, I recognized it as a very old dried out and shriveled lime that had turned black, hard, and hollow over time. I could not stop laughing. Story 12. My grandma is at that age where people she knew pass away somewhat often. If she knew them well, she often gets invited to help clean out the house and almost always comes back with something she thinks we could sell. I've currently got 2 paintings, copies or reproductions or something probably, that were done by someone who studied under Kincaid sitting in the back of my car. She apparently found them online going to about 200. I think I could get more for the frames than the pictures. Story 13. My grandparents had a 1922, I think that was the year, peace coin. According to Pawn Stars, if it was a high-relief coin, it would have been worth $50,000. Would have still gotten me a good chunk of change. Problem was, it went missing after my grandparents died. I even looked where it was kept but couldn't find it. That seriously ticks me off because I could really use that money right about now. It was originally in the basement of their house. I found it and gave it to them. I tried to persuade them to sell it when I looked it up and found out it was worth money, but they didn't want to. Story 14. This reminds me of something that happened to me at elementary. We were making a rock collection, and there was one, transparent, very pretty, and hard to find, but I managed to find one on the beach. After I got my grade, I was admiring my collection and saw that the transparent rock had a symbol engraved. I thought that made it more unique until I realized where I saw that symbol before. The rock was just a piece of glass from a soda bottle wore off by the sea. Story 15. Bought a couple of cowboy-style hats from the local dollar store for a Western-themed dinner. They look similar to leather and set me back about $2.50 or so each. Took them to the local thrift store along with some other stuff afterwards. The dollar store price tags were still on the inside. Incredibly enough, they had put them in their auction, and in their auction book, someone had bid $60 for them. I just had to go and see the final result. Guy won the bid, paid, and you should have heard the guy scream when he saw the dollar store tags inside. The thing is, during the time things are up for auction, you can examine them. I thought it was hilarious. Hope he enjoyed his $2 store hats. Story 16. We used to have a secondhand store. We didn't buy from people, we bought from auctions. But we did have countless people trying to sell us all kinds of things that were probably stolen. We had people coming in all the time looking to buy guns off the record deals. We didn't sell guns. And then there were the horrible customers. We would get a bunch that tried to get us to sell them items for next to nothing so they could resell it for a profit. One item in particular was an RCBS rock chucker reloading press in unused condition with accessories and a nice powder measure. Guy kept coming in wanting it for $20, claiming they'll sell new for $30. Do they think we don't research the value? Story 17. 2 decades ago, I worked at the original Vintage Stock, back when it was part of Book Barn. You have no idea what kinds of bizarre junk people would bring in. I was a skinny little cute thing back then and tended to get a lot of attention from people who didn't think I had a brain in my head. One guy tried to flirt his way into getting me to buy an old watch. We didn't buy watches and certainly didn't do appraisals. Story 18. Once when I was really down on my luck, got fired, savings were running low, and bills were all past due, I bit the bullet and tried to sell my guitars, amps, and pedals to a pawn shop. I had 2 acoustic Gibsons and a Les Paul. Total price used would be around $1,600 just for the guitars, plus 3 Fender stage amps and various pedals. They told me they'd offer me $140 for all 3 guitars and $20 each amp. They didn't even want the pedals. I laughed at the guy and he got ticked and told me to leave, went on Facebook Marketplace and sold them all individually and made right around $4,000 within the week. Story 19. Part of gun safety is always treat a gun as loaded, even when it's confirmed it's not. Never risk it. Edit. I once found a pretty big rock when on scout camp while hiking. Every leader laughed and said, "We're not going to carry an ugly stone. Do you collect stones now?" Once back in camp, I broke open the rock pretty much in the middle. It was full of crystals. They were shocked, and I brought it up whenever I could to laugh at them and annoy them. Also did it with a very old U.S. Jeep shovel and 50 cal bullet casing I found. Gave it to a local museum.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.